5 divers entered a cave beneath paradise, and never came back out. Beneath the crystal blue waters of the Maldives, a mother, her daughter, and 3 marine researchers vanished inside an underwater labyrinth so dangerous that even rescue divers could not reach them. What happened 50 meters below the surface turned one of the most beautiful places on Earth into a silent underwater tomb. Imagine the most beautiful place you have ever seen in your life. Now imagine watching it swallow 5 people whole. The Maldives. Just the name alone conjures something close to a dream, a string of low-lying islands scattered like stepping stones across the Indian Ocean, just off the southern tip of India, where the water runs so impossibly blue and so impossibly clear that photographs of it barely look real. It is the kind of place people save for years to visit. The kind of place honeymooners choose. The kind of place scientists and marine biologists and ecology professors choose, not just for its beauty, but for what lives beneath the surface, an underwater world so rich, so layered, so alive that it has drawn researchers and divers from every corner of the globe for decades. It is the kind of place where, on a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning, 5 people descended into the water and never came back up. 4 of their bodies have still not been found. This is the story of what happened beneath the Vaavu Atoll. This is the story of 5 Italian nationals, scientists, students, a mother and her daughter who went into an underwater cave system in one of the most celebrated dive locations on the planet, and disappeared into the dark. This is a story about the ocean, about human error, about panic, about sediment, and about the terrifying speed at which paradise can become a tomb. And this is a story about what the experts who knew that cave, who had dived it themselves, say really happened down there. Stay with me, because this one goes deep. If this story is already pulling you in, go ahead right now and hit that like button, leave a comment telling me what you think happened down there. Now let's get into it. To understand what happened beneath the Vaavu Atoll, you first need to understand the geography, because geography is everything in this case. The Maldives is not simply an island. It is not even simply a group of islands. It is an archipelago, a nation made almost entirely of water, consisting of over 1,000 individual coral islands grouped into 26 natural ring-shaped coral structures called atolls. These atolls sit in the Indian Ocean, and they stretch for nearly 900 kilometers from north to south. The country is, by almost any measure, one of the most geographically unique nations on the face of the Earth. Its highest natural point sits less than 3 meters above sea level. It is, in every meaningful sense, a civilization built on and around water. The Vaavu Atoll, sometimes called the Feelite Atoll, sits roughly 100 kilometers south of Male, the capital city. It is a place known among the international diving community not just for the quality of its reefs and the warmth of its water, but for something rarer and more extraordinary, its underwater cave systems. Caves that plunge deep beneath the ocean floor. Caves that extend far beyond what casual or recreational divers ever attempt. Caves with their own internal geography, their own currents, their own ecosystems, and their own particular, unforgiving set of dangers. The cave at the center of this story sits beneath the island of Alimatha, in the Vaavu Atoll. It descends to a depth of approximately 50 meters below the water's surface. 50 meters. For context, the maximum recommended depth for recreational scuba diving, the kind of diving that does not require advanced technical training, is 40 meters. 50 meters is already past that boundary. At that depth, the pressure on the human body is 6 times greater than at the surface. The behavior of gases in the bloodstream changes. The risks multiply. And the cave itself, the physical structure of it, extends horizontally for 260 meters through the rock beneath the ocean floor. 260 meters of passages, chambers, tunnels, and turns. In some sections, the passage narrows. In others, it opens into larger cavern spaces. There are multiple routes, multiple directions, multiple ways to become completely and utterly lost in the dark. The dive on that Thursday morning was organized under the banner of what organizers called a citizen scientist excursion. This is a growing model in marine research, bringing together trained scientists, enthusiastic students, and passionate amateurs to collect real data from the natural world. It democratizes science. It opens the door of fieldwork to people who might otherwise never get to participate in genuine marine research. And in a place like the Maldives, where coral systems and marine biodiversity are under constant threat from climate change and ocean warming, citizen science programs have real value. Real purpose. The group aboard the dive vessel that morning reflected exactly that spirit. There was a professor of ecology, a woman with years of academic experience and an obvious, deep-rooted connection to the natural world. There was her daughter, a university student pursuing a degree in medical bioengineering, accompanying her mother into the water that she had grown up hearing about, grown up loving. There was a recently graduated student of marine biology, someone who had just finished years of study and had chosen this trip as a celebration of that achievement, a chance to see the ocean they had spent years reading about up close, in person, in all its living reality. 2 more Italians completed the group of 5, all of them connected, in one way or another, to science, to the sea, to the idea that the natural world is something worth understanding, worth protecting, worth diving into. 20 other people remained aboard the vessel that morning. They did not enter the water. For reasons of choice, health, equipment, scheduling, or simple preference, they stayed on the surface. And in doing so, they became witnesses to something no one should ever have to watch unfold, a disaster playing out beneath the water below them, invisible, unstoppable, and utterly silent from where they stood. The dive vessel's name was the Duke of York. That name will come up again. The divers entered the water on Thursday morning, local Maldivian time. They descended toward the cave entrance. They went in. And then the surface stayed still. Minutes passed. The kind of minutes that feel ordinary at first, then begin to feel slightly too long, then become impossible to ignore. Dive schedules exist for a reason. They calculate oxygen consumption at given depths and set firm windows for how long divers can safely stay down. When those windows close and the divers haven't surfaced, something is wrong. The crew of the Duke of York raised the alarm. Emergency services responded. Rescue divers entered the water. And that first round of underwater search, conducted by trained professionals with full equipment and the benefit of knowing roughly where the cave system was, came back having found only one of the 5. One body, located and recovered. For others, nowhere. Not just not recovered. Not found. The cave had taken them so far inside, through so many turns and passages and chambers, that experienced rescue divers could not locate them on the first attempt. Think about what that means. Think about the size of that cave system. 260 meters of underwater passages, running 50 meters below the surface, in conditions that, as we will get to, were far from ideal that morning. Even the people trying to find the victims couldn't find them. The Italian government opened a formal investigation. The Maldivian authorities coordinated their own emergency response. And the world began asking the question that this kind of tragedy always produces: what went wrong? How does something like this happen in a location famous for its safety, its professionalism, its beauty? How do 5 people, educated, passionate, science-minded people who understood the value of careful preparation, go into the water and not come back? The answers that have emerged are both technical and deeply human. And understanding them requires going into the cave yourself, at least in your mind, and feeling what it would actually be like to be down there when things start to go wrong. Let us start with the gas. When recreational scuba divers fill their tanks, they are typically using atmospheric air, the same mixture we breathe at the surface every day. That mixture is approximately 79% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. It is cheap, widely available, and perfectly adequate for dives conducted within standard recreational limits, generally no deeper than 40 meters, for durations calculated to prevent dangerous nitrogen buildup in the blood. But cave diving at depth is not recreational diving. It is a different discipline with different demands, and one of those demands is a precisely calculated gas mixture suited to the specific depth of the planned dive. Too much nitrogen at depth causes a condition called nitrogen narcosis, sometimes described by divers as being similar to alcohol intoxication. It clouds judgment, slows reaction time, creates a dreamy, detached sense of unreality that can lead to catastrophically bad decisions in moments that require the sharpest possible thinking. Too much oxygen, at depth, causes a different and even more acutely dangerous condition, oxygen toxicity, which can trigger sudden seizures with no warning whatsoever. A diver who seizes underwater, at 50 meters depth, inside a cave, does not survive. This is why the word precision comes up repeatedly in accounts of this dive operation. Umberto Pellizzari, one of the most decorated free divers in the history of the sport, an Italian who has broken multiple world records for breath-hold diving depth and duration, and a man who had personally dived with this same operator, on this same boat, in this same atoll just 6 months before the incident, told reporters that the operator was, in his words, super professional. Very precise. He specifically used that word, precise. And in the context of cave diving at depth, precision has one primary meaning. It means the gas blend in those tanks was calculated correctly. It means the equipment was checked. It means the dive plan was followed. Some speculation in the early coverage of this story pointed to a possible mix-up in the gas blend, a suggestion that perhaps the wrong mixture was loaded into some or all of the tanks before the dive. This kind of error does happen in the diving industry. It is rare among professional operators, but it is not unheard of. The consequences of breathing the wrong gas mixture at depth can be rapid and catastrophic. If any of the 5 divers experienced nitrogen narcosis or oxygen toxicity inside that cave, their ability to think clearly, navigate effectively, stay calm, and find their way out would have been severely compromised. But Pellizzari, speaking from first-hand experience of diving with this operator, pushed back firmly on this line of thinking. He voiced confidence in the professionalism of the team, in the quality of the equipment, in the precision of the preparation. And there is a logical argument to support his position. If the gas blend was wrong, if it was wrong in a way that caused incapacitation, you might plausibly see one diver in difficulty. Perhaps two, if adjacent tanks were filled from the same incorrectly mixed batch. But 5 divers, all of them affected simultaneously, all of them incapacitated to the point of not being able to exit a cave? That scenario requires a level of across-the-board error that becomes increasingly difficult to sustain as a primary explanation. Which brings us to the cave. And the sediment. The cave beneath the Vaavu Atoll is not a simple room. It is not the kind of underwater cave you might see in a nature documentary, a wide, light-filled, slowly breathing space with clearly defined walls and a clearly defined exit. This cave is a system. A network. A branching, turning, three-dimensional labyrinth of rock passages carved out beneath the ocean floor over millions of years of geological activity. 260 meters of it. At some points those passages are wide enough for multiple divers to move through side by side. At others they narrow. At others they branch, offering what appear to be equal options for navigation, with only the diver's memory, training, and judgment to determine which direction leads out and which leads deeper in. In good conditions, with excellent visibility, with calm and methodical movement through the water, this cave can be dived safely by experienced, properly trained cave divers. There is footage of this cave, shot in the months leading up to this tragedy, that shows exactly what good conditions look like down there. The water is clear enough to make out the rock formations of the cave walls. The passage is navigable. A diver with proper training, proper equipment, and proper self-discipline can move through it and back out again. But visibility in that cave is not a fixed quantity. It is not something that can be guaranteed from one dive to the next, or even from one moment to the next within a single dive. Because the floor of the cave, the sediment that has accumulated down there over those same millions of years, is disturbed with extraordinary ease. The person who filmed that footage of the cave in the months before this incident described, when asked directly about the sediment situation, a very specific scenario. During one of his dives, a fellow diver made a slightly imprecise movement with their fins, a kick that was fractionally too wide, too low, too close to the cave floor. The sediment on that floor rose in a cloud. Visibility, in that area of the cave, dropped immediately and dramatically. And it took approximately 2 minutes for the sediment to settle back down and visibility to return. 2 minutes. That sounds manageable. That sounds like a problem with a straightforward solution: stop moving, wait, let things settle, continue. Except that this was one diver, making one mistake, in an area of the cave where conditions were otherwise calm. The sediment in that particular spot took 2 minutes to settle. In a different spot, with a thicker layer of accumulated sediment, it might take longer. In a situation where multiple divers are moving through the same passage at the same time, and one of them kicks up a cloud that blinds the diver behind them, who then panics and kicks up a cloud of their own, and the diver behind them does the same, 2 minutes becomes 5. 5 becomes 10. 10 becomes something else entirely. And here is the critical detail about sediment in a cave at depth: torches do not help. Flashlights do not help. It is one of the great counterintuitive facts of underwater cave diving, and it is something that Umberto Pellizzari articulated with perfect clarity in his interview with the Italian newspaper La Stampa. When sediment fills the water around you in a cave, he said, shining a light into it is like turning on your headlights in a fog. You do not suddenly see through the fog. The light hits the particles in the water and bounces back at you, and what you see is a wall of luminous murk brown, thick, disorienting, absolute. You cannot see the walls. You cannot see the ceiling. You cannot see the floor. You cannot see the diver next to you. You cannot see the diver behind you. And critically, catastrophically, you cannot see the passage you came through to get where you are. The way back, the exit, the route that would take you from wherever you are in that cave back to the open water and the surface and the sunlight is gone. Not partially obscured. Not difficult to make out. Gone. Consumed by a brown-black, swirling, impenetrable fog that your torch makes worse, not better. At that moment, the cave does not feel like a dive site anymore. It feels like a room with no doors. Pellizzari described the sequence of events that he believed could have unfolded with the kind of quiet authority that comes from someone who has spent a lifetime in the water, who has pushed the boundaries of what the human body can do in the ocean, and who has lived to reflect on what separates the dives that go well from the dives that do not. You can start to panic in the caves, he said. You start swimming with your flippers and that raises the sediment. You are wearing flippers and you do not always know where they end. You can no longer find the way out. And when the torches stop working, when the headlights hit the fog, the cave becomes a trap. A trap. That is the precise word he used. Not a challenge. Not a hazard. A trap. Something that is entered freely and exited only with difficulty, or, in the worst cases, not exited at all. The correct response to a sediment whiteout in an underwater cave, the response that trained technical cave divers drill until it becomes muscle memory, is the one that human instinct fights against most fiercely. Stop. Do not move. Do not swim. Do not kick. Hold your position in the water as still as you possibly can, breathe slowly, conserve your oxygen, and wait. Wait in the dark, in the silence, with the weight of 50 meters of ocean above you and 260 meters of cave around you, and let the sediment settle. Let visibility return. And only then, slowly, carefully, methodically, begin to navigate your way back toward the exit. That is the correct response. It is also the response that requires a level of mental composure that is extraordinarily difficult to maintain when you are lost, when you cannot see, when you are running an internal countdown of how much oxygen remains in your tank, when the person next to you is moving, when the person behind you is kicking, when everything in your body is screaming at you to do something, anything, to move, to find a way out, to escape. Now picture doing that in a group. Picture one person staying still while another person next to them cannot. Picture the person who cannot stay still kicking up more sediment, making visibility worse, extending the weight, deepening the panic. Picture the feedback loop of fear feeding movement feeding sediment feeding blindness feeding fear. In an open water environment, that loop can be interrupted, you can surface, you can call for help, you can get to fresh air and reset. Inside a cave at 50 meters depth, there is no interruption. There is only the cave. And on that Thursday morning, there was also the weather. The conditions at the surface that day were described by CNN as unfavorable. A yellow weather alert had been issued for the Vaavu Atoll and the surrounding area. The sea was rough. In the world of diving, rough sea conditions at the surface are not merely an inconvenience to be endured before you get in the water and leave the weather behind. They are a factor that reaches beneath the surface with you. Rough sea conditions generate underwater currents, not always strong enough to prevent diving, but strong enough to create movement in the water column, to reduce visibility in areas where sediment sits on the ocean floor, to make the conditions inside an enclosed cave environment cloudier, less stable, and more unpredictable than on a calm day. The footage of this cave shot on calm days shows what good visibility looks like. Even then, even in the best conditions, with experienced divers moving carefully and deliberately, there is visible sediment suspended in the water. There are particles drifting. There is a quality to the water that is less like looking through glass and more like looking through very slightly smoky glass. Beautiful, navigable, but not perfect. Add a weather event. Add rough surface conditions driving currents down through the water column. Add whatever that does to the sediment layer on the floor of a cave 50 meters beneath the surface. And then ask whether this particular Thursday morning was the right time to take a group of citizen scientists, however enthusiastic, however well-intentioned, however connected to marine research, into a 260-meter cave system at that depth. That is the question that investigators are now trying to answer. Whether the decision to enter the water that morning, given the conditions, represented a misjudgment. Whether the yellow weather alert should have been a hard stop. Whether the conditions that the crew of the Duke of York could see from the surface were sufficient warning of what conditions inside the cave would be. And if those questions have uncomfortable answers, if the evidence suggests that the dive should not have happened that morning, then this tragedy carries with it an additional weight that is familiar from every major disaster where human decision-making failed to match the reality of the environment. From Everest in 1996, when experienced guides and clients pushed on toward a summit through worsening weather because the pull of the mountain was stronger, in that moment.
5 divers, a Latin American mother, her daughter, and 3 marine researchers, entered a cave beneath Paradise and never came back out.
Integrity were ignored and 5 people died in the crushing depths of the North Atlantic. From every incident where the combination of enthusiasm, sunk cost, group dynamics, and a reluctance to disappoint creates a pressure to proceed when the right answer is to stop. None of that analysis, however, diminishes the tragedy of who was lost. Let us sit with that for a moment, because it matters. These were not abstract victims. They were people. The ecology professor. A woman who had built a career studying the systems and processes that sustain life on this planet. Who had chosen to bring her daughter on this expedition, presumably because she wanted her daughter to see what she saw when she looked at the ocean, not just water, but a world. A world worth understanding, worth caring about, worth protecting. That choice, to bring her daughter, speaks to a relationship between a parent and a child built on a shared sense of wonder. And it ended, in a cave, in the dark, in the Maldives. The daughter. A university student studying medical bioengineering, a field that sits at the intersection of biology and technology, of the natural world and human ingenuity. She was there with her mother. She was young. She had her whole career ahead of her, years of research and contribution ahead of her. She went into that cave as someone learning to love the ocean the way her mother loved it. The marine biology graduate. Someone who had just finished years of study, had just crossed the finish line of a degree program that demands genuine commitment and genuine curiosity, and had celebrated that achievement by doing exactly what a newly minted marine biologist would be expected to do, going to one of the most extraordinary marine environments on the planet and diving into it. That trip, in a different world, would have been the beginning of a career. A story about the dive that inspired the work that followed. And the 2 others. Also Italians. Also connected, in their own ways, to the sea and to science. 20 people stood on the deck of the Duke of York and watched those 5 go down. 20 people who, for whatever reason, were not in the water that morning. 20 people who became witnesses to a disaster they could not see, in a cave they could not enter, at a depth they could not reach. 20 people who had to watch the clock and then watch the crew and then watch the rescue divers enter the water and come back without answers. Think about what that experience does to a person. Think about standing on a boat in rough water, under a yellow weather alert sky, watching rescue divers go down and come up empty, knowing that somewhere below you, right there, directly below where you're standing, 5 people are in that cave, and no one knows if they're alive or not, and no one can reach them, and the weather is making everything worse, and the sediment makes it impossible to see. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with the words "I am still here." Let us see who is truly following this story all the way through, because what comes next is where it gets even more difficult to process. The rescue operation that followed the alarm raised by the crew of the Duke of York illustrates, in painful detail, just how complex the challenge of recovering people from an underwater cave system really is. This was not a situation where first responders could simply go in after the missing divers. This was not a situation where the location of the victims was known and the task was simply to reach them. This was a situation where trained rescue divers entered a 260-meter cave system and came back unable to find 4 of the 5 people they were looking for. That single fact tells you everything about what the interior of that cave looks like in disturbed conditions. If the visibility inside the cave had been reasonable, if the water had been clear enough to see more than a meter or 2 in any direction, experienced rescue divers would have been able to work their way through the passages systematically and locate the missing. Instead, they found 1 and could not find the other 4. Which means that the conditions inside the cave, by the time rescue divers entered, were severe enough to prevent a thorough search even by people with professional training and full equipment. The next phase of the rescue operation required a pause. Not a pause born of indifference, but a pause born of necessity. Before sending more divers into that cave, the rescue teams needed to plan their approach, assess the current state of conditions inside the system, and ensure that they were not sending additional divers into the same situation that had claimed 5 lives. The weather above the surface continued to be uncooperative. Rough conditions persisted. The currents that had potentially contributed to the deterioration of conditions inside the cave on Thursday morning were still active. Every additional hour of rough weather was another hour of potential sediment disturbance inside the cave, potentially making the internal environment even more challenging to navigate safely. This is one of the cruelest aspects of a cave diving tragedy. The very conditions that may have caused the disaster in the first place can also be the conditions that prevent a swift and complete recovery. The cave becomes both the scene of the incident and the obstacle to resolving it. The ocean, indifferent to human urgency, moves on its own schedule. The currents settle when they settle. The sediment drops when it drops. And the families waiting for news in Italy, connected by phone and by the crushing weight of uncertainty to an atoll in the Indian Ocean they may never have visited, have no choice but to wait on the same schedule. The Italian government responded swiftly at the diplomatic and investigative level. An official investigation was opened to examine every aspect of what happened. The decision to dive given the weather conditions, the composition of the gas in the dive tanks, the adequacy of the equipment used, the experience level and training of the dive operator, the appropriateness of this particular cave system for the kind of group undertaking this excursion. These are the questions that formal investigations are designed to answer, and they are the right questions to ask. Not to assign blame in the immediate wake of grief, but because the answers matter. Because what is learned from this tragedy could determine whether the same thing happens to the next group of citizen scientists who book a cave dive in the Vaavu Atoll, or anywhere else. Umberto Pellizzari, for his part, did not shy away from the complexity of the situation. He spoke with the honesty of someone who has deep respect for the ocean, who has tested himself against it at the most extreme levels and who therefore understands, more viscerally than most, exactly what the ocean is capable of doing to even the most experienced and prepared person. He endorsed the professionalism of the operator. He expressed confidence in their precision and their care. And he simultaneously described, in clear and unambiguous terms, exactly how a situation like this could unfold even when everything else was done correctly. The weather. The currents. The sediment. The panic. The feedback loop. The cave becoming a trap. Both things can be true. A dive operator can be professional and precise and genuinely committed to safety, and a dive can still go catastrophically wrong. The ocean does not grade on a curve. It does not reward good intentions or careful preparation with guaranteed safety. It simply is what it is, complex, powerful, dynamic, and fundamentally indifferent to the plans of the people who enter it. This is a lesson that appears, in one form or another, in nearly every major disaster that has unfolded in the natural world and been examined carefully afterward. The 1996 Everest disaster, in which 8 climbers died in a single afternoon when a fast-moving storm caught multiple teams in exposed positions high on the mountain, was not the result of recklessness alone. Some of the most experienced Everest guides of their generation were on that mountain that day. They made judgments, in real time, under pressure, with incomplete information, that turned out to be wrong. Not because they were incompetent, but because the mountain presented them with a set of conditions that exceeded what their experience and preparation had equipped them to handle. The ocean is the same kind of teacher. Uncompromising, non-negotiable, and utterly unconcerned with whether you are a world record free diver or a first-time snorkeler. When conditions deteriorate past a certain threshold, the environment becomes dangerous for everyone in it. What makes the Maldives cave tragedy particularly haunting is the gap between the setting and the outcome. The Maldives is not a place associated with danger. It is not K2 or the North Atlantic in winter or the Everest death zone. It is paradise. It is a place where the water is warm and the visibility is famous for its clarity and the marine life is extraordinary and the diving community has decades of experience operating safely. The brochures for this kind of trip do not prepare you for what can happen in a cave. They show you the blue water and the coral reefs and the manta rays and the promise of an experience that will stay with you for the rest of your life. For 5 people aboard the Duke of York that Thursday morning, that promise was kept in the cruelest possible way. The experience did stay with them. It was the last experience they had. There is something important to be said here about the nature of cave diving as a discipline, because it is fundamentally different from what most people imagine when they think about scuba diving. Open water diving, the kind of diving most people have experienced on a tropical holiday or a recreational excursion, takes place in an environment where the diver always has direct access to the surface. If something goes wrong, if you feel unwell, if your equipment malfunctions, if you run low on air, the solution is always the same and always available: ascend. Go up. Reach the surface. The sky is there. Help is there. Breathable air is there. Cave diving removes that option entirely. Inside a cave, you cannot simply ascend. The ceiling above you is rock. The exit behind you, the only way to reach open water and then the surface, is horizontal, not vertical, and may be a significant distance away through a network of passages. In cave diving, the overhead environment is the defining characteristic and the defining danger. There is no vertical escape route. Every problem that presents itself inside a cave must be solved inside the cave. Equipment failure, gas depletion, disorientation, panic, injury, all of it must be managed while remaining submerged, breathing from a finite supply of gas, in an environment where the exit is a route to be navigated rather than a surface to be reached. This is why the training requirements for genuine cave diving are extensive and demanding, and why the gap between a qualified cave diver and an open water diver, or even an experienced recreational diver, is enormous. Cave diving certifications from recognized agencies like NAOI, PADI, or the Global Underwater Explorers involve multiple progressive levels of training, beginning with cavern diving, staying close enough to the entrance that the natural light from the opening is always visible, and progressing through introductory cave, full cave, and finally advanced cave levels that permit exploration deep into complex systems. Each level introduces new skills, guideline protocols, gas management for overhead environments, managing multiple light sources, emergency procedures specific to the cave environment, and navigation techniques that function even when visibility is severely reduced. The 5 divers who went into the Vaavu Atoll cave that Thursday morning, the ecology professor, her daughter, the marine biology graduate, and the 2 other Italian nationals, were citizen science participants. They were enthusiastic, scientifically literate, deeply interested in the marine environment. But the question of whether they held the specific certifications for this level of cave diving, at this depth, under these conditions, is one of the threads that investigators are pulling on as they reconstruct the events of that morning. This is not about assigning blame to the victims. People go on excursions that turn out to be beyond their training all the time, often without being told clearly where the line is. The responsibility for matching participants to appropriate experiences lies primarily with the organizers and operators, with the people who design these programs and sell these experiences. If this excursion was marketed as a citizen science dive and attracted participants whose primary qualification was a passion for marine biology rather than advanced cave diving certification, that is a systemic question about how these programs are designed and regulated, not a question about the character or the judgment of the individuals who sign up. The Maldivian tourism industry, like many dive tourism industries worldwide, operates under a regulatory framework, but the specifics of how those regulations apply to citizen science excursions, to guided cave dives, to mixed experience groups, are precisely the kind of details that investigations like this one are designed to scrutinize. Not to kill the industry or close the caves, but to ensure that the gap between the experience being offered and the experience being delivered is closed before the next tragedy, not after. Umberto Pellizzari's position that the operator was professional and precise is important and should not be dismissed. He was there. He dove with these people. He has the expertise to evaluate what he saw. And his reading of the situation was not that the operator failed in preparation, but that conditions on the day conspired with human factors inside the cave to produce an outcome that no amount of careful preparation could have prevented once a certain threshold was crossed. That threshold, in his telling, was the moment visibility went to zero. The moment the sediment filled the water. The moment the torches became headlights in a fog. That is the moment from which recovery becomes extraordinarily difficult, not impossible for the most highly trained cave divers, who drill specifically for this scenario, but extremely difficult for divers whose primary training was not specifically oriented around this kind of overhead environment emergency management. Think about that moment from the inside. Put yourself in that cave. You are 50 meters below the ocean surface. The water around you, which was clear when you entered, clear enough to appreciate the extraordinary geology of the cave walls, the formations that took millions of years to build, is no longer clear. You cannot see your hand if you extend it in front of your face. The light from your torch, rather than illuminating the passage ahead, creates a dim glow in the murk that tells you exactly nothing about where you are or which direction leads out. Somewhere behind you, in the swirling dark, are the other people you entered with. You can hear the sound of your own breathing through the regulator. You can feel the weight of the water. You can feel, in the way that the body communicates certainty without words, that you are lost. Your tank is not infinite. Every breath you take is a breath from a supply that has been finite since the moment you entered the water. How much is left? Enough to stay calm and wait for visibility to return? Enough to navigate your way back through 260 meters of cave passage even once it does? The math of gas consumption at depth is unforgiving. The deeper you are, the more gas each breath requires, the faster your tank depletes. At 50 meters, you are burning through your supply roughly 6 times faster than you would at the surface. And so the question, when to wait and when to move, becomes not just a navigational question but a survival calculation. Wait too long and you run out of gas before visibility returns. Move too soon and you burn gas on disoriented swimming that takes you deeper into the cave rather than toward the exit. Neither option is clean. Neither option is safe. And every option requires a calm, clear-headed assessment of the situation, which is precisely what panic makes impossible. This is the trap. This is what Pellizzari meant. Not a trap in the sense of something deliberately set. A trap in the physical, mechanical sense, a structure entered freely that cannot be exited without precisely the right sequence of actions, in precisely the right conditions, executed with precisely the right level of composure. And composure, under these conditions, is not a character trait. It is a trained response. A learned behavior. Something that experienced cave divers develop through hours of controlled, supervised practice in exactly this kind of scenario, so that when it happens in a real cave, the body knows what to do even when the mind is screaming. For 5 people who went into that cave on a citizen science excursion on a rough Thursday morning in the Vaavu Atoll, the question of whether the trained response was in place, whether the hours of practice had happened, whether the drills had been run, whether the muscle memory existed, is the question at the heart of this investigation. And it is a question that does not reduce to a simple answer. Because even trained cave divers die in caves. Even people who have logged hundreds of cave dives, who carry multiple redundant light sources and gas supplies and know the guideline protocols by heart, even they sometimes do not come back. The cave does not make promises. The overhead environment does not grant exceptions. The sediment settles when it settles. This is also why the decision to enter, given the weather conditions that morning, deserves its own careful examination. A yellow weather alert is not a suggestion. It is not a mild advisory that experienced operators routinely disregard. It is a formal notice from the relevant meteorological authority that conditions in the area present elevated risk. In any safety-conscious operation, whether you are running a diving excursion, a boat tour, a hiking trip, or any other outdoor activity, a yellow weather alert triggers a specific set of questions. Is the planned activity appropriate for these conditions? Has the risk calculation changed? Should the excursion be postponed? The answers to those questions are judgment calls, and judgment calls are made by human beings who carry their own biases and pressures into them. There is the pressure of the participants, who have traveled a long distance for this experience and are standing on the boat, ready, excited, emotionally invested. There is the pressure of the schedule, of the business, of the reputation for always delivering. There is the natural human tendency, particularly in people who are confident in their expertise, to assess their own ability to manage elevated risk as higher than it perhaps should be. And there is the seductive familiarity of a dive site that has been dived hundreds of times without incident, a familiarity that can create a dangerous illusion of predictability in an environment that is anything but predictable. In the 1996 Everest season, the guides who made the decision to continue toward the summit on the afternoon of the 10th of May did so based on experience, on optimism, on the reasonable assessment that the weather, while deteriorating, was not yet at the level that required an immediate turnaround. They were wrong. The storm arrived faster and with more force than the assessment accounted for. 8 people did not come down from the mountain. On a Thursday morning in the Vaavu Atoll, with a yellow weather alert in place and rough sea conditions visible on the surface, a decision was made to enter the water and proceed with a cave dive 50 meters below the surface. The conditions inside that cave, whether driven by the surface weather, by the disturbance of multiple divers moving through a sediment-rich passage, by panic, by disorientation, or by some combination of all of these, became unsurvivable for 4 of the 5 people who went in. The investigation will determine, in time, where the responsibility lies and what changes need to be made. But in the immediate aftermath of this tragedy, what deserves acknowledgement is simply the reality of what happened and what it means. 5 people went into a beautiful cave beneath a beautiful ocean in one of the most celebrated destinations on the planet. They went in with open minds and scientific curiosity and love for the natural world. They went in as a mother and daughter. As a newly minted graduate. As enthusiasts and researchers and human beings who wanted to experience something extraordinary. And the cave became a trap. The ocean does not punish. It does not judge. It does not care whether your intentions were good or your preparation was careful or your passion for the natural world was genuine. It simply is what it is: vast, powerful, complex, and subject to conditions that change faster than any human plan can accommodate. This is what every experienced diver knows, in the deepest part of their knowledge, and what every non-diver needs to understand when they try to make sense of tragedies like this one. The dive sites of the Maldives are among the most extraordinary in the world. The marine biodiversity of the Vaavu Atoll is real and remarkable and worth protecting and worth studying. The citizen science model, bringing scientific curiosity to bear in the field, expanding the reach of marine research beyond the walls of universities, is genuinely valuable. None of those things are negated by what happened on that Thursday morning. But they also cannot be allowed to obscure what happened, or to prevent the hard examination of how it happened and what must change to prevent it from happening again. 4 bodies are still inside that cave. 4 people who went in with the sunrise and who have not come out. Their families, in Italy, are waiting. The Italian government's investigation is ongoing. The rescue teams, battling the same rough weather conditions that may have contributed to the tragedy, are working to complete the recovery. And 20 people who were on that boat, who stood on the deck of the Duke of York and watched, and could not help, and could only wait, are carrying the weight of what they witnessed in the only way you can carry something like that, one day at a time, with whatever combination of grief and gratitude and altered understanding of risk that an experience like that instills in the people who survive it. This story is not over. The investigation is ongoing. The recovery operation continues. And the families of the 5 Italian nationals who went into the Vaavu Atoll cave and did not come back are living, right now, in the suspended reality of waiting for closure that may take weeks more to arrive. But there are things we can say already. Things that the evidence, the expert testimony, the first-hand accounts, and the basic physics of what happens inside an underwater cave at 50 meters depth have already made clear. The weather was a factor. The sediment was a factor. Panic inside the cave was almost certainly a factor. And the combination of those 3 elements in a cave system 260 meters deep, at a depth that exceeds the standard recreational limit, with surface conditions that had already earned a formal weather alert, created a set of circumstances that overwhelmed the ability of 5 people to find their way back to the light. The light, by the way, was right there. 50 meters above them. The same brilliant, postcard blue light that makes the Maldives one of the most photographed places on the planet. The same light that 20 people on the deck of the Duke of York were standing in when the divers went down. The same light that the diving community returns to, again and again, because there is something about the moment of surfacing, the moment the darkness of the water gives way to the blue-white blaze of the sky, that never gets old. 5 people did not get to surface into that light on Thursday morning. And the only honest response to that, the response that honors who they were and what they were trying to do and what this tragedy cost, is to look at what happened without flinching, and to ensure that the lessons of this cave, paid for at the highest possible price, are never forgotten. The ocean is a privilege. The underwater world is a privilege. Experiencing it is a privilege that comes with an obligation to understand the environment you are entering, to prepare honestly for its demands, to listen to what the conditions are telling you, and, sometimes, to recognize that the most courageous decision you can make is the one to turn around, to stay on the boat, to wait for a better day. 5 people in the Vaavu Atoll did not get a better day. We owe it to them to make sure that someone else does. If you are watching this at the surface, breathing easy, with the sky above you and solid ground beneath your feet, take a moment with this story before you scroll on. Take a moment with the ecology professor who brought her daughter to the place she loved most. With the newly graduated marine biologist who had earned a celebration and chose this one. With the 20 people on the deck of the Duke of York who saw the water close over their companions and did not see them rise again. The Maldives will continue to receive visitors. The caves of the Vaavu Atoll will continue to be dived. The citizen science programs that connect enthusiastic participants to real marine research will continue to operate. None of that changes today. But for 5 Italian nationals, and for the people who loved them, and for the 20 who stood on a boat and watched, today is the day that paradise showed its other face. And understanding that face honestly, completely, without the distorting lens of brochure photography and travel fantasy, is the only way to make sure that the next group of people who descend toward a cave like that one can do so with their eyes fully open. Go in knowing what the cave is. Go in knowing what the sediment can do. Go in knowing that the torches will not save you from the fog they create. Go in knowing that calm is not a character trait but a trained response, and that the training matters, and that the conditions on the day matter, and that no amount of passion for the natural world substitutes for the specific, demanding, technically rigorous preparation that cave diving at depth requires. Or, sometimes, do not go in at all. That choice, to stay on the boat, to read the water, to listen to what the weather is saying, is not weakness. It is not timidity. It is not a failure of curiosity or a betrayal of the spirit of scientific exploration. It is the choice that gets you home. 5 people in the Vaavu Atoll on a Thursday morning in the Maldives did not get to make that choice, or made a different one. We do not yet know all the details of how the decision to enter the water was made, or what they saw when they got inside, or what the final minutes in that cave looked like. The investigation will fill in some of those details. Some of them may never be fully known. What is known, what is certain, what cannot be disputed by any reading of the available evidence is that an underwater cave at 50 meters depth, in rough weather, with disturbed sediment and no direct route to the surface, is one of the most unforgiving environments a human being can enter. And that 5 people entered it on that Thursday morning and were not able to find their way back out. Their names deserve to be remembered. Their story deserves to be told completely and honestly. And the lessons of their deaths deserve to be taken seriously, not just by the dive industry, not just by the regulators and investigators, but by every person who has ever looked at a photograph of the Maldives and thought about what it would be like to go there. To get in the water. To go deeper than the reef. To see what is down there in the dark. What is down there is extraordinary. What is down there is real and beautiful and scientifically significant and worth every legitimate, well-prepared, appropriately supervised effort to experience and understand. And what is down there, on the wrong day, in the wrong conditions, without the right preparation, is exactly what 5 Italian nationals found when the sediment rose and the visibility dropped and the cave became a room without doors. This is the true crime narrator. And this story, like every story on this channel, belongs to the people it happened to. Remember them. Share this story. And do not look away from what the truth costs. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you stop and consider something you had not considered before, then let it do its work. Hit the like button if you want more stories told with this level of depth and honesty. Subscribe to True Crime Narrator and ring the notification bell so you are here for the next one. And leave a comment below. Tell me what you took from this story. Tell me what you think investigators need to look at most closely. Tell me if you have ever been in a situation where the environment told you to stop and you had to decide whether to listen. This channel exists because these stories matter, because real events, told completely and without distortion, have the power to change the way we think, the way we move through the world, and sometimes the choices that keep us alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying with it all the way to the end. And I will see you in the next one. True Crime Narrator, every story deserves to be told right.